there is a forbidden book, lost for centuries, that includes fallen angels, bloodthirsty giants, and a warning to all humanity.
The Book of Enoch is a highly controversial and convoluted subject, enveloped in a dizzying haze of Ethiopian tradition, occultic mythology, esoteric mysticism, and uneducated assumption. The personage of Enoch himself is ambiguous at best, leading many people to conjure up wild speculations concerning who he was, where he went, and what exactly he wrote. Though the Bible reveals very little about Enoch, the writer of the book of Jude boldly quotes verbatim from one of the works ascribed to him. The argument of whether or not the book of Enoch should be canonized and included in the Bible is irrelevant. The only question we should be asking is whether or not the book of Enoch is true. Could it be that we are the generation who will be living in the day of tribulation when all the wicked and godless are to be removed? If so, then the book of Enoch, written in the dawn of humanity, is addressed to us who are living in the twilight.
The Book of Enoch is, again, when scholars talk about it, they're referring to something called First Enoch. There's actually 3 books of Enoch, but the first one is the one that gets all the attention, and for good reason. It was something that circulated really widely in the intertestamental period, again, what scholars call the Second Temple period. And so it would have been a book read by Jesus and read by the apostles, the New Testament writers, and any Jew that sort of read stuff in the Second Temple period would know about Enoch and would know the contents, the storyline, and so on and so forth about this book. Now, for us, our evidence of this book only goes back to about the 3rd or 2nd century BC.
It may have been the first written manuscript in terms of a prophecy that was written down and passed on, that was literally addressed to the last generation, the generation that will be living in the end.
And isn't that amazing that our generation is the generation where the Book of Enoch is getting more and more popular?
And this seems to be the time in which it's resurfacing, and there are proofs coming out that are pointing to the fact that indeed it is as old as we think it is.
It is an ancient writing filled with divine secrets, dreams, and visions. A tour of heaven and hell, guided by the angel Uriel. The Book of Enoch is named for the man who the Holy Bible says walked with God.
Enoch walked with God after the birth of Methuselah 300 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him.
This is one of those curious stories in the Old Testament that we kind of look at and just kind of go, like the Genesis 6, 1 through 4, okay, giants, okay, we'll just kind of file that away as one of those curious little things that doesn't really matter to us today. Enoch, of course, is one of 2 Old Testament, patriarchs who were brought up to heaven without dying. So just from that alone, you'd assume there was something significant about it. How important was the Book of Enoch considered to the writers who lived during the time of the New Testament? Well, the authors of the New Testament.
In the academic world, scholars spend a lot of time on Enoch and its relationship to the New Testament. Because you would think, and again, I've read this in Christian books, we shouldn't even think about the Book of Enoch because the New Testament never quotes it, New Testament never bothers with it. That's just false. That's just wrong. It is quoted very clearly in 1 or 2 places, but there are dozens of allusions to the material, to the storyline in particular, in this book. And so it really leaks into some New Testament passages in fascinating ways. The one that's kind of the most obvious is when Peter and Jude write about the angels that sinned. And again, there's no other candidate for that phrase other than the Genesis 6, 1 through 4 incident. The whole idea of, the third of the angels being swept down in a rebellion. And you get that in Revelation 12, again, the last book of the Bible. You get that in Revelation 12, but that event is cast in connection with the first coming of Jesus, the birth of the Messiah. So there's a war in heaven in connection with that. So this idea that this is primeval is largely something that comes from like Paradise Lost, Christian tradition. You don't actually have, biblical precedent for this. But Peter and Jude are writing about the angels that sin, and they use certain lines that come from Enoch, certain ideas. The angels that are kept in gloomy darkness, chained in gloomy darkness, prisoned in the abyss. Well, you don't read that in Genesis 6:1-4 or anywhere else in the Old Testament. Where you do read it is books like First Enoch in the intertestamental literature. Now, it's true that you get, again, the disembodied spirits of the giants, okay, the immaterial version of the Rephaim in Sheol, in the underworld. You get that in the Old Testament, but some of the specific language that Peter and Jude, offer, especially when in Peter's case, he uses a verb tartarao, to be kept in Tartarus. That's a very specific allusion to the Titan story, which is the secular Greek.
Oh, yes.
It's the secular Greek version of what Enoch is writing. So that's probably the most blatant example of where it's not quoted explicitly, but there are absolutely clear themes in Enoch that show up in the New Testament writings.
Titanomachy would be the same as what in biblical terms?
There's actually two versions of the Titanomachy in ancient Greek literature, and one of them is very close again to the Genesis 6:1-4, the Watcher story, the sin of the Watchers, and that's actually what I focus on in the book, because the specific episode where you have the sin of the Watchers, which is Enoch's language for Genesis 6:1-4, the sons of God cohabiting with the daughters of men, producing Nephilim. That episode is really dealt with in 1 Enoch 6-15. So 9 chapters, and they're all very short, so it's not a whole lot of material, but that episode is really important for New Testament writers, because in Jewish theology of the day, if you asked a Jew, hey, why is the world the mess that it is? Why is human depravity so bad? They wouldn't answer you like a Christian would today. A Christian would say, oh, that's the fall. Well, a Second Temple Jew would say, well, yeah, the fall's an issue because there we have the first, entrance of sin into God's good world. But the real culprits here are the Watchers, because in the Watcher's story, and also it's true in the story that's behind Genesis 6 from Mesopotamia that the writer of Enoch knew, what the real problem is when the Watchers sin like this, they also teach humanity lots of things that corrupt humanity. And so if you asked a Jew, hey, why are people so bad? What's up with depravity? They would say, well, it kind of got started with the garden, but the real impact is the sin of the Watchers. And so you have that idea, kind of the proliferation of evil being laid at the feet of the Watchers. That idea is picked up in several passages in the New Testament that you'd never really know. It's kind of lurking under the surface unless you kind of knew what you were looking for. If you had read Enoch, you'd know that.
Not just the Titan story, but also gets into Prometheus.
Yeah. The whole. I mean, there are some pretty interesting counterparts picked up on in the quote Greek mythology or the Greek stuff that isn't related to the Bible, isn't a translation of the Bible, that kind of thing. But yeah, you get clear touch points with that kind of material, and it all goes back to earlier days. Whoever wrote Enoch very clearly knew the real backstory of Genesis 6:1-4, and that is the Mesopotamian story of the Apkallu. Because there are things in Mesopotamian literature in those stories that show up also in Enoch. So again, it's very clear that whoever wrote that knew not only the Old Testament, Genesis 6:1-4, but also knew the more ancient backstory that Genesis 6:1-4 was responding to. Again, sort of shooting theologically at some specific points of Mesopotamian religion. So whoever wrote Enoch knew all that stuff and puts it all together in their work, and then Peter and Jude and other New Testament writers, dip into it either quotation-wise or allusion-wise. And so you actually get, it sounds really odd, but you actually get in a Jewish work from the time of Jesus, you get preserved the original context for why Genesis 6:1-4 is even in the Bible.
This version of the fall of the angels was very popular in its day and maintained popularity for centuries to come. When we look at Dante's work on the Inferno, it's largely out of the material in Enoch. When we look at various snips of the New Testament, Enoch seems to be in play. In Corinthians, when Paul talks about women covering their hair so the angels won't be seduced and tempted, it goes back to the fallen angels tradition.
With its lush descriptions of heavenly powers and the horrors that await evildoers, even angels, Enoch was one of the most popular books among the early Christians.
We know that some early Christians considered the writings of Enoch to be authoritative, to contain actual revelation from God. So, because some people thought that, some influential people thought that, the book was used as you would use other books of the Bible.
Could the reason for the Bible's ambiguity concerning Enoch be due to the fact that his story was already thoroughly chronicled elsewhere in Scripture? This seems likely. If Enoch, the seventh from Adam, is indeed the author of a book, it would have been written long before the book of Genesis, which is generally thought to have been penned by Moses, or by an anonymous author after Moses. The writer of the book of Genesis, whoever he was, would have had no need to retell the story of Enoch had it been already recorded in detail and widely disseminated, especially if it were written by Enoch's own hand. It is plausible, then, that the book of Enoch may have provided the foundation for much of the narrative of not only the book of Genesis, but the entire Bible, both Old and New Testament, and may well be the very first, certainly the very earliest, record of human literature. In light of this information, it is apparent that the most credible version of the book of Enoch is unquestionably 1st Enoch, since it was written long before the birth of Christ and contains prophetic revelation concerning him. Because of this, we can decisively confirm or deny the validity of 1st Enoch based on the accuracy of its prophetic revelation and the doctrine of its theological content, juxtaposed with the teachings of Jesus and his disciples. The writer of the book of Jude, as mentioned earlier, boldly quotes verbatim from the book of Enoch in the context of prophecy. Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Nevertheless, by 500 AD, despite widespread popularity and endorsement by many early church personalities, the Book of Enoch was virtually purged from the face of the earth at the hands of the satanic priesthood of the Roman Catholic Church. The Book of Enoch, perhaps the very first book ever written by the hand of a human being, proclaims the undisputed lordship of the Son of Man and prophesies with articulate clarity his millennial reign at the end of the age, in accordance with Jesus' own words and the teachings of the apostles. Before all other known manuscripts, the Book of Enoch designates the coming Messiah as the Anointed One, the Righteous One, the Elect One, and the Son of Man. The term Son of Man is an explicit title, not a descriptor, and the one that Jesus most often used when referring to himself. And yet this term, employed as an explicit title, is nowhere to be found in the pages of the Old Testament, except perhaps on one occasion in the book of Daniel. However, it is the dominant title designated for the Messiah in the book of Enoch. When Jesus claimed to be the Son of Man, he was not saying that he was merely a Son of Man, but the Son of Man. What is the determining factor for inspired prophetic text, if not the testimony of Jesus Christ? We know that the whole Bible, cover to cover, testifies of Jesus, the Son of God, even in ways we haven't yet figured out, and is verified by the very truth of its testimony. Those who have blindly condemned the book of Enoch without reading it, or weighing its content in the balance of the gospel, may be surprised to discover that the revelation of Jesus Christ is the centerpiece of its message, a message which is addressed to the elect and righteous who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are to be removed. Now, regardless of mine or anyone else's opinion, the Book of Enoch must be judged on the merit of its messianic content. A cursory review of some of its pages quickly discloses the nature of that content.
The Book of Enoch begins with a warning to all humanity that a divine judgment has been rendered and a sentence will be imposed. God tells Enoch that all life on earth will be destroyed in a violent flood, and, as with the story in Genesis, God blames this evil on the sons of God, angels who lusted after the daughters of men.
These angels are sometimes referred to as watchers. They keep constant watch, and they decide one day, about 200 of them, that they're going to descend to the earth. They were spiritual beings, and they were to remain as such. When they decided to descend upon earth, this unleashed upon the earth all sorts of problems. Not only these giants who are bloodthirsty and violent, but also these angels went on to teach humankind a variety of forbidden crafts. They also taught human beings how to make weapons of war.
Now, the good angels, the ones not tempted by these beautiful women, go to God and say, you know, there's a lot of bloodshed caused by these bad angels. At which point God says we need to bind Azazel, the sort of lead fallen angel, to bind him and to then cast him into a pit. We might think of this as, how do we take care of nuclear waste in the 21st century? You take it out to a part of the world where no one lives, and you bury it as deep as you can. For this community, the angel was like that sort of nuclear waste. Dangerous, volatile.
After the rebel angels are cast into the depths of the earth, Enoch has a dream vision. The lead angel, Azazel, begs Enoch to plead their case before God, to petition the Almighty to release them from the depths of the earth. The request for clemency is denied.
The cover-up has always been to keep this biblically relevant topic out of the minds of the people, so at an appropriate time in the future, they can claim whatever they want to claim, and they'll claim anything and everything apart from the true biblical origin of giants.
When the giants killed each other, when they died, that their bodies, their spirits would be forced to wander the earth bodiless, and yet they would have all the desires that are associated with the flesh, but without flesh. Mm-hmm. So it's a very torturous situation for them, and that they would become. Oh, and by the way, what I didn't say was it says they would become unclean spirits,
right,
on the earth. And so we see that Jesus shows up, and these unclean spirits, specifically they're called unclean spirits. They recognized him immediately. Mm-hmm. They recognized him because part of their judgment was that at some point in time, at the end of the age, they would be judged. Mm-hmm. That the day of their judgment was pending. And so when Jesus showed up, they recognized the judge. Mm-hmm. They realized the judge has come to the earth. Even though the Pharisees and the scribes and the men of the law and of the Torah could not recognize him.
They totally missed it.
But the unclean spirits, the spirits of the giants, mm-hmm. recognized the judge, which is incredible. Yeah, because I have no indication in either the Bible or the Book of Enoch that the giants had ever gone up to heaven. Right. So how is it that they recognized the judge? Yeah,
and not only that, but recognized that he was coming prematurely.
He was coming prematurely because they said the hour of our judgment has not yet come. Yeah. Right. And so this absolutely validates the text of the Book of Enoch in my in my estimation. And so they recognize that Jesus is here. They throw themselves at his feet, inhabiting the bodies of these people. So these people are being thrown at the feet of Jesus and screaming, "We know who you are. You are the Son of God." Mm-hmm. And Jesus tells them, "Be silent." And I believe in one case he says, "Don't say that. Don't tell people that." Yeah. And because it wasn't to be the testimony of demons that declared who he was.
That's right.
And even though they knew who he was, mm-hmm. they knew. Even though the people doubted, the unclean spirits knew. And these are very arcane, ancient entities. Yeah. pre-flood entities that recognized the Son of God. And so he had complete authority over them, obviously. And so that, I think that's very interesting to see the line of these unclean spirits, the continuation of them, all the way from the pre-flood context, all the way to Jesus is here. The great judge has come.
Yeah.
And that also testifies to the fact that they didn't know that he would come and die.
Right.
To redeem mankind. In fact, that this was a mystery. This was a mystery, even I believe, to angels.
Right.
That the Son of the living God would come and die.
Yeah, because if they would have known that, they never would have conspired to put him on the cross.
And so this must have been absolutely baffling to these entities. That for these people, for this race. That is so inferior compared to angels and all these other entities, that the Son of God, the great judge, is coming to give his life for them, to redeem them. Imagine how astounded all of these other entities, the angels and all these angelic beings were watching this unfold.
Yeah.
And the good guys, so to speak, and the bad guys.
Yeah.
Watching the gospel literally unfold for us.
Isn't that amazing?
And yet so many of us believers, we take it for granted.
Yeah, that's true.
And so it's really amazing that here, the judge is here. Wait a minute. It's not time yet. Based on what? Based on what scripture are these unclean spirits saying this?
Yeah, exactly.
Based on the book of Enoch. Based on the text that we have in the book of Enoch, which, by the way, the Hebrews knew. The Hebrews were very familiar with the Watchers, the fall of the Watchers, and they understood this was their Bible story, so to speak.
Yeah.
And a part of them was the days of Noah and what that meant, and the days of Methuselah and the days of Jared, and whose name means, by the way, shall come down. It was in the days of Jared that the 200 Watchers descended.
Yeah, very true. Do you think that because there was so much mystery and angels, demons, fallen angels, humanity, they were baffled by Jesus' first coming. Do you think his second coming is going to be shrouded in that much mystery?
That's a good question. Well, Jesus himself says that nobody knows the day or the hour, not even him. So if he doesn't know, certainly they don't.
Yeah.
I think we may be able to discern the season.
Sure.
And certainly they would be able to, but the day or the hour, we don't know. They don't know. And I don't think there's any angel in heaven that knows the day or the hour. So certainly there isn't any demonic force that would know. I think that they will have an idea of when we're entering into that season based on the things that Jesus tells us in Matthew 24 and the things that are laid out in the book of Revelation. I think we all have, unfortunately, kind of a Sunday school paradigm that we struggle with our entire lives, especially as we're maturing in our understanding of the scriptures. But we're always fighting this very simplistic Sunday school paradigm, is the way that I refer to it. Things are very black and white. Even to some believers who consider themselves to be mature believers, they still see things in very simplistic terms when they're dealing with a complexity that really we can't even fathom.